How's it going, you guys? It's Scott with Everyday Home Repairs. I want to walk you through the complete process of doing a DIY retaining wall. Specifically for my use case, it was to give me a flat 20-foot by 30-foot pad that I can build a shed on top of. But there is a number of different applications around your house where it's handy to be able to build a retaining wall, whether that's just a landscaping project or a functional project that needs to structurally hold something up like this one. Starting off, I'm going to put a reference stake here on the property line and then measure 20 feet, which is the reference length of my shorter side, and sink another stake. Now I'll use both of these stakes and measure 42 feet off of that. What this is going to give is my overall length of my longer side, 30 feet, plus the 12 feet offset away from the property line. So that's why I'm measuring 42 feet instead of just the 30 feet. Now once I get both of these stakes that are the furthest side away from the property line, I'll go ahead and start connecting these up with some string. Now I'll go ahead and use my pink string and a small line bubble level and make sure I have a reference level line all the way around the perimeter of this pad. And then that's how I'm going to start to measure to understand how high is my retaining wall going to need to be. And that's going to help me plan out all of my materials. So now we're at a pretty good point, and I would not rush this. You really want to make sure you have your plan of attack before you tackle a job such as this, because there's a lot of labor involved and you're going to have a lot of redo, and you might not get the finished product you're looking for if you rush this part. So I have all four corners in place. I have my pink level line in place. I use some marking paint to mark straight down from the line and then offset 12 inches on each side, because that's actually what I'm going to cut out while I set my retaining wall block. And now I can find my lowest point of my overall perimeter. And really it's right here. So from my level pink line, I'm looking at just over 28 inches for the highest part that I'd have to bring my retaining wall up to. Just keep in mind, you're not setting your block right on this surface. We need to actually dig this out, and we need to put a base down. I'm going to put a 4-inch base. Check with your local area, check with the professionals and some of the hardscape and landscape supply houses, and they'll let you know what you should do for the retaining wall block you're using. I don't necessarily recommend going to Home Depot or Lowe's. I would go to the pros, and I'll show you the difference here in a second. You're going to get a better product, and you're going to have those guys that you can actually talk to that know the product and have expertise to help you out. So I'll go ahead and start digging this lowest side out. Also setting a bit of a curve. I'm not doing a true 90 for these corners. I do want to set a bit of a curve on a radius for this one and my far side there. And then once we get that base, which we'll go over a little bit more, we'll start setting in our first course. And that is a very important part. You're never going to be better than that first course. That's what's setting the success of your overall project, is setting that first course in a solid foundation and making sure everything's level. So I start off digging here with just a pick and a spade, and then you'll see later on as I kind of trim things down to the final grade, I'll use a trench shovel, which can come in very handy for this type of project. Now all of our ground conditions will be a little different. Mine's mostly red clay, but I also have a bunch of rocks mixed in there, which makes things interesting. So now I'm ready to kind of do the final trim of the bottom of my trench here, referencing my line. Now sometimes this can take you multiple days, so recheck your line and make sure it's level and everything's good so you can reference that and do your measurement. So the question is, how do you know how deep to go? Well, that is where you're going to need to start looking at your materials. I'm 35 inches here, and that would give me a 3-inch compacted base and then 32 additional inches. I'm going to trim it out a little bit more so I can get a 4-inch compacted base. And if you need references, an easy guide, we do have our PDF guide. You'll see a link in the description, or you can just go ahead and scan this QR code if you're watching on your TV. Download that and it'll help to guide your own project, and it has spots where you can make your own notes, because every one of these retaining walls is going to be a little different. But I know that I want that 32 inches to meet this line because I'm referencing my materials. Now I'm going with a commercial grade block. This is an 8-inch block, and it is 83 pounds. This is what municipalities, states, and counties would use to actually make their own retaining walls, and it's gonna equal a much, much, much better product than your standard 4-inch block that you can get from a home improvement center. This is 24 pounds, and just overall that weight is gonna make a big difference. Just know if you're picking retaining wall blocks, make sure they have that little designed lip in them, because that lip would then hook onto the course below, and that does help to lock things in place. But the amount of weight on top from the block is a big deal, so that is why I like to go with a much, much larger commercial grade block. And to reiterate, don't be using any sort of just landscaping block here, which would be a little bit more for edging or a feature of your landscape. This is not retaining wall block. Do not use that. And then also know you do not have to dig your whole perimeter out. And why is that? It's because once your ground starts sloping up, you're not gonna have 4 courses like I do on this downside, or 3 or 2, or however many you are doing on your own project. You're gonna start having less and less as the ground surface comes up to your level line, that final finished grade that you're looking for. So I only dug out where I know I need my bottom course set. And then once I get that all set, I'll determine, okay, now where are we going? 3 courses, 2 courses, and 1 course, so I can minimize the amount of digging that I have to do. Now, if you have a big project, you might want to consider renting an excavator or some types of piece of equipment, because this can be very, very labor intensive. So just make those plans going into it. And then finish things off in the digging part of this project to get the final grade. I use that trench shovel. It's really nice to take off that last 2 or 3 inches and to get a flat bottom so you're ready to start putting in your compacted base. So you'll trim everything around to the depth you know that you need your first course. And then once you have that, you'll start using your base. For me, this is a CA6. It's a combination of gravel and fines and makes for a great foundation. So you'll place that along your whole trench, referencing your level line to make sure, for me, getting to 32 inches for that first level of the course. Now, if you want to spend a ton of time here and get absolutely everything perfect, it does make placing those blocks for your first course faster. For me, I got it roughed in, and then I made those final adjustments at each of the blocks, which does make the time that I spend on each block a lot longer as compared to if you spend a lot more time getting the base in place and absolutely perfect front to back. I do that with each of these blocks. To each their own, you pick your path and whichever's easiest for you. Now, I put a little sand down there. I do not recommend putting sand to fill that in. I recommend just using your compacted base, as sand is not going to be nearly as good of a foundation. It makes things easier to level up, but will not provide a solid foundation. Here's a close look, and this is obviously sped up, and it's going to be the equivalent of setting 1 block. For me, this 1 block is about my 6th or 7th putting. It took about 8 or 8.5 minutes, so you can take that time period as a reference for you of how long it's going to take multiplied by your blocks, and you're going to get better as you go, and things should get faster and easier. Now, I will caution you, this is where most homers make the mistake, and that is rushing this process. It takes a ton of time, it takes a ton of effort, and it can be frustrating, but do not rush that first foundational layer, that first course of retaining wall blocks, because that sets you up for success for the rest of your project. And then I moved on to the curved corners. For me, I'm using the minimum radius that I can pull for a curve with these type of blocks. You'll want to reference the manufacturer specs on your own blocks to make sure you're not trying to make too tight of a corner. Now, right at the end of my corner is where I'll start stepping things up. So this is really the end of my first course. Once you have your first course, then you can take your 3/4 inch clean gravel, place it inside the blocks and behind the blocks to start getting ready for drainage and our second course. Kicking off the second course, I want to make sure I have this through the wall drain outlet in place. To do that, all I'm going to take is a 4-inch corrugated tee, a small section of corrugated you saw me put in that outlet, so then I can fit up this custom through the wall drain outlet. Now I'll tape up each one of these connections, and I won't put all of my drain pipe in quite yet. I just want this one T fitting so I can start setting the second course, because that is 1 inch wide, and you want to make sure that you account for it before you put in your second course, or you're going to get yourself in trouble down the road. If your first course was set in, everything's level, your second, third, and fourth courses should go in pretty darn smoothly. Now, working on this curve, I will have a transition from a wall that is 4 blocks tall to a wall that's 3 blocks tall. So I just need to set my compacted base to make sure it's at the same level as we transition from the 4 courses to the 3 courses. And you'll see that's coming in right here. So we'll set one more block, and then we'll set one half on block, half on the compacted base. And then I have rain coming in. So I'm just gonna kind of clean up my site. I have my first course in, and then that second course on the farther end. So anything in contact with my slope is in place. So now I can backfill and kind of get that grade back in place, move everything around as when rain comes through. And if you have a job site like this with stuff everywhere, it can make quite the mess of things. And then also I'm gonna put a 10-foot section of 4-inch corrugated drain pipe here, and it's offset because this is the lowest part of my wall. So that second course is completely exposed, and it'll allow the water to weep out onto the grade. And then from the other end of the outlet, I'll put 2 full 10-foot sections and a third that I'll trim up, capping both ends. And I'll also show you what I'm going to do with fabric to wrap this to try to keep the soil and gravel separate. So now kind of completing this drain pipe. And what I did is I filled my second course of blocks with my 3/4 inch clean gravel, made sure those were all filled. And then I took a fabric and put that up underneath my corrugated drain pipe and started to fill 3/4 inch clean gravel on top of that fabric. Now I had to kind of pin the fabric down, especially if you have any wind, to make sure you can get a good amount of gravel packed up around the drain pipe. And then what I'm gonna do is I'll go ahead and wrap this drain pipe. I'll get the gravel all placed, wrap it tight, and then backfill with a little bit more 3/4 inch gravel. Now I called in some reinforcements here and got a 25 horsepower tractor with a front loader so I can start to move a lot more material. Because one, I'm putting a lot of clean 3/4 inch gravel inside the fabric, and also on the backside. The fabric hopefully will keep the dirt, my clay, away from my clean gravel, and then allow that drain pipe to flush out any of the water that builds up behind my retaining wall. That is the overall concept. Let me know if you have any feedback down in the comments. And remember, all of our soils are a little bit different. So the pipe I used actually has large holes in it. You might just be using perforated pipe with the slits in it, depending on your soil. And if you want a lot more information on that, there is a whole YouTube channel on that, the French Drain Guide. I'll link it down below the video. Also, in the downloadable guide, the nice thing about these guides is I can improve them over time. So if I get a ton of feedback that I did one thing wrong, I will go ahead and put that on the last page so you can reference that while you're building out your own plan. So don't forget, you can get this download, link in the description, or you can just scan the QR code if you're watching it on your TV. Now I did also start to put in some blocks on my third course, and that was because my pipe is a little bit higher on the end. I wanted to make sure the outlet was the lowest point in the drain pipe, so that end is a bit higher, and I just wanted to make sure the third course was in so I didn't have any interference later on as I finish up the fabric and the clean 3/4 inch gravel, that I wasn't fighting it to get those blocks into place. And then I'm gonna let things dry up a little bit more, and then we're gonna start backfilling this. I'll get my third course in, I'll start working my sides into the grade, so I'll have to do a little bit more cutting away, building out a foundation, kind of building those up, but also start filling and compacting the dirt here to get this completely level. And I do predict this is gonna be about 14 yards of material that I'm gonna have to compact, but I will update you on the overall project cost and the complete quantities that I used at the end of the video. Now I wanna finish off my curve here, so I'll have the drain pipe completely against the block. I'm not gonna run drain pipe all the way along my sides, so I just wanna complete this out so I can backfill with the 3/4 inch clean gravel and then start to fill in the dirt, as I do need to fill quite a bit of dirt on the backside of this retaining wall, which you'll see in a second. So I'll progress through putting 2 blocks down here on the compacted base, going back and forth, making sure everything is completely level. Then once we get that, I can put my third course. This side that we're looking at here is gonna be a total of 4 courses high. So I'll just finish off this third course, And it's a lot of material management when you're dealing with a project this large. So you got to check when the landscape supply center is closing down. If you're going into the weekend, you got to plan and make sure you have all those materials so you can continue to make progress, as this is a multi-day or even a multi-week job. So we'll start to fill in that 3/4 inch clean gravel. And what I'm also doing here is filling that third course of block inside. So I want to get that all filled so I can place the fourth course as well. And then we'll get all the pipe covered up and make sure we have at least 6 inches on top and on the side of that drain pipe while we also fill in that third course. So once it's filled in, now I can just start setting the fourth course in place. And as we know, if we set our first course and our foundation correctly, these additional courses start to go in very easy. And don't forget, most places over 4 feet tall, you start to get into an engineered wall. This one is not going to be that tall. It's only a max of about 28 to 30 inches above my low side here, above the slope. So I don't have to plan out any engineered or what's called geogrid that can give you more strength if you're going above 4 feet tall. So I will start backfilling in. This is where a tractor or something that can carry much more than a shovel worth of dirt comes in super handy. And as I need to fill in about 20 inches or so on the backside here of dirt. So now I need to compact this base. And what I'm doing is I'm laying in about 6 to 8 inch lifts. So that just means 6 to 8 inches of new material. And then I'll compact that down. And then I'll bring in my 3/4 inch to make sure I always have the clean 3/4 inch on the backside of those blocks. And then I'll transition to the dirt. I do not recommend you just put a bunch of fill and you don't compact it. And also a hand tamper for something this large is almost a no-go. It would take you forever and you're not going to get the same results. So I still, even after compacting this one, I have about 12 inches to 16 inches to fill. But you can see each one of those blocks is 8 inches and I have a little bit more than that. And then I have a 3 to 4 inch top cap on top of that. Now this is just kind of a clean red Georgia clay that I'm putting in here. But if I want to do a flower bed all the way around, I'll probably put a little bit better soil in there. And then also here, I'll have it compacted down, but I'll be putting a concrete pad for a future 12 by 16 modern shed build, which will do all sorts of stuff like powering it with solar, insulating it, mini split systems, and a bunch of cool projects. So don't forget to subscribe so you see those projects as well as we go. So that will be a compacted base underneath that 4 to 5 inch pad that we'll be laying down. So I'm going to get this up to probably the top of those blocks, and then that's it. I have a little bit more work here on the sides. I have 1 course to pull all the way along the sides, and then 2 courses that will transition to 1 on the side behind you. So I do have to lay down a little bit more foundation, level out those blocks as I go, and then continue to backfill. So I'll do a couple rounds here with the plate compactor, get everything compacted down, and then start moving on to the sides. As you work up your slope, you'll have to decide when you start to transition from 4 courses to 3 courses to 2 courses. So what you want to do is just check your level line and make sure that you would able to get 4 inches of block underneath the grade. So it cannot be right on top of the grade. You want that block where 4 inches for this specific block is underneath the grade. So you just have to check that and then make the transition. Here, finishing out this row, we're going to go from 2 courses, which is what I'm working on right here. And then because I'm approaching the line, I'm able to then transition to only having 1 course, and then that will finish off our side. Take your time and make sure you're getting everything lined up with your string and that your string is still level, because usually this does take multiple days to get all the blocks set on a project of this size. So we'll tamp things down and finish up on this side, getting a few more blocks here put into place, making sure everything looks good. And something you won't see is I do fill 3/4 inch gravel inside of these blocks and on the back side as well. You always want to make sure that you fill those up and you don't get too many courses without filling them, or you might be missing some of the gaps getting that clean 3/4 inch gravel within your actual retaining wall. So now here's where your tractor or skid steer or something that can handle a little bit more fill material comes in handy. You'll continue to just do rounds and fill in the holes. It's not going to be perfect at this stage. It's going to have little dips and dives and kind of look like a roller coaster a bit. as you keep filling in. And then don't forget to get the clean 3/4 of an inch on the back side of your block so you're not pushing your fill dirt all the way up to the back of your block to help with your drainage. And I have a little bit of weather coming in, so I'm going to try to place as much dirt as I can before the rain comes in and compact that down to minimize how messy the job site gets. And because these usually stretch out into weeks of effort for this size of a project, you do want to kind of keep your site cleaned up, or you can kind of have a mess on your hands if you get a little erosion from a large rainstorm. So now we're reaching the home stretch, and what we're going to do here is start cutting our top caps. For the straights, super easy and you're not cutting anything, but for the curves you got to cut. So what I use is 2 full pieces here, get those lined up, and then stack one on top and make my marks. These are going to be the 4 corners of my cut lines. So I just mark those, lining them up with the pieces on the bottom, and then I take those over to a pallet, connect those up with a straight edge, and now I have my cut lines. And I rented a 12-inch concrete saw from Home Depot. Just make sure you get the one with the water option. It'll help keep the dust to a minimum and just makes for a lot easier cut because you're cooling down the diamond blade. So we'll go ahead and make our cuts. Overall, pretty straightforward. Might need 1 or 2 attempts to get used to the saw. Fit those in place, small adjustments, trying to minimize your gaps as much as possible and maintaining about a 1/2 inch overhang or reveal as close as possible, although it'll be a little tricky going around your corners. Now, once you get past your corners, the straights go in as easy as you can set them in. Just remember, I'm dry setting here. You do need some industrial adhesive to hold those to the block for long term. Now that was a large project, one of the larger ones I've done on the channel, but I'm super satisfied with the overall end product. I have a little bit more backfilling to do, but I'm not going to go too far because I need to figure out exactly where my concrete pad is going to go for our future modern shed build. But let's go ahead and look at my numbers. How many hours did I spend on this, and how much did I spend in material cost, and how much did I save from the estimated labor costs by doing this myself? All right, so looking at the build guide, and this is the exact one that you guys can download. I had my overall plan, and I'll include this so you guys have it for reference, but I'll also include this sheet, which is just my overall tracking and what I purchased and how long did I actually take. Overall, my labor hours were 78 hours, obviously no cost associated to that, but for your reference, in my area, it's $40 to $55 per square foot of retaining wall. So you need to figure out the square footage, including the square footage that is below grade, to get an estimate on what that would cost in your area. But you can talk to contractors to get a better idea. For me, if I used $45, I had about a 150 square foot. So I saved about $6,750 on my labor by doing this DIY. That's a pretty major savings when it comes to DIY projects. Now here is what I used. 2 yards of the foundation gravel, 3.5 yards of the 3/4 inch drainage gravel, 14 yards of fill dirt, and there is the overall cost per yard and the cost overall that I spent on the project from a gravel and dirt perspective. Then blocks, I used 128 blocks at $9.01 a piece, and you can see the sum total there, largest cost of the project by far. 46 top caps at $687, there's the cost there. The drainage pipe rolled up for $127, and then miscellaneous was $143.22. Depending on the amount of tools that you have, this could be more. Now this section also could be a lot more for you. I have a 5-ton dump trailer. I did 4 loads with that dump trailer, so it didn't cost me anything. I did not include that. So if you need to get a dump trailer to haul things, or maybe you're gonna have to pay for delivery charges, just know that cost might be added in. I do have a 25 horsepower Kubota with a loader. I use that quite a bit. I use 6.5 hours on the service meter reading. So if you're going to rent a skid steer or tractor, try to find a rental store that is closed on the weekends and see if you can rent it on a Friday and only get charged by 1 day if you return it Monday morning because they're not open. Usually they'll limit to you 8-hour service meter reading. So in that case, you would get 1 day of charge for that skid steer or tractor, but you would get 3 days worth of work because the service meter reading you are not going to run. Do not idle the machine or it's going to increment your service meter reading. I have a plate compactor. I just bought it from Harbor Freight for $599. You might need to rent one of those. I did not rent an excavator. Depending on how large of a project, that might be something that you want. And I did rent that concrete saw for one day at $125. Everything all together, $2,667.41 was my material cost. And like we said up here, that is what I saved on labor. So hopefully that helped you out. Don't forget, link in the description for the guide, or you can just scan this QR code if you're watching on your TV and download that guide, whether you're doing the project now or just in the planning phases. This will really help out. And let me know if you have any questions or comments. Would you do something different? Did I do something wrong? I always appreciate hearing from you guys, and now we can roll some of those consistent comments into the FAQ section for the benefit of future viewers. Now, if you also need a level pad for a shed, there are other options. Kind of one level down, you can check out this video right here, and Carlos from Everyday Shed will show you how to do this with using pressure treated posts and doing something similar, but it's a lot less work. Or if you want kind of the shortcut, it's not going to be nearly as nice and stable as this. You can check this example out here and it'll at least get your shed leveled up in your yard. So thanks for joining me on this video, and we'll catch you on one of those next ones. Take care.